Today I'd like to share a little bit of what I'm learning about the Buddha image. And I'm going to share a little bit, just kind of general overview, and then the story from Zen Master Dogen's Zui Monkey. The Zui Monkey is the sayings of Eihei Dogen. It's a primer for the Shobo Genzo, and then conclude from there. Okay, so first of all, I wanted to share, one of the reasons I sit Zazen, this seated Zen practice. Well, I can give you my reasons, but maybe take a moment to reflect on why you sit Zazen. Right? Why do you sit Zazen? What is interesting to you about this practice of Zazen? And I'll just open that up. If any of you um, feel moved to share briefly, what moves you to sit Zazen? Yeah, feel free to unmute yourself and just share. Yeah, go ahead.
This is Tara. Thanks for the meditation online. Um, it's the way. It's the first thing I thought of.
The way, okay. All right.
For me, it's to remember who I really am.
Remember who I really am. Okay, wow. Yeah.
For me, it just happens.
Mm. Yeah, it just happens. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, those are good starting points. I'll just share for my own experiences, and this is particularly relating back to the Buddha image, the image of the Buddha. The first time I ever saw an image of the Buddha was in high school. I was a junior in high school, and we were reading Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. And on the cover of the book was a statue of the Buddha, an image of a statue of the Buddha. That was my first, that was my first seeing, that was my first image of a Buddha. And I didn't realize it then, but now I realize how much that has impacted the way that I am, just that image of the Buddha. And actually, I fell in love with the image of the Buddha. I fell in love with the image of the Buddha, so much so that I wanted to sit like that. And it took me 4 years from that initial encounter with an image of the Buddha to actually sit like a Buddha. I didn't realize until for 4 years that people actually sit in that way, conform their body to an upright posture with a particular hand mudra and cross their legs sitting on the floor. I know not everybody sits on the floor. Some people use a chair, and that's all fine. But for me, especially as a young person, wanting to sit cross-legged on the floor, but it wasn't until I received instructions on how to do that from my teacher that I realized, oh, this is, like Taro was saying, this is a path, this is a way. And like Diane was saying, this is a way to, not just a way, but it's also a way to know myself, just conforming myself to this particular posture of zazen, of seated meditation. But but this love of zazen, this love of seated meditation, is a real obstacle, I think, for us if we're not careful. And so that's what I wanted to bring up today, the obstacle. It's a big problem, actually. It's a huge problem. It'd be better maybe if none of us ever encountered an image of the Buddha. But we have, so the cat's already out of the bag. So just by happenstance, I came across this book at the Nebraska Zen Center called The Buddha Image. And I thought, I'm going to just read a couple of pages and I'll know right away whether it's worth reading or not. So this Buddha image, it's fascinating to think about how did the image of the Buddha come about in the first place? How did this image of the Buddha come about? Because apparently, according to my teacher, the Buddha, and according to certain sources within the Buddhist sutras, the Buddha expressly requested that he not be made into an image when he dies, that there be no image. And if that had been the case, how would we have related to the Buddha image, or this posture of Zazen, which is so central to Zen Buddhism? How would we, if there wasn't an image of the Buddha, how could we possibly relate to the Buddha? And especially since the Buddha requested that no image be made. And the way that my teacher explained it, which I came to learn is not actually the case. She explained it that the Buddha didn't want to be made into a god. And it was by not being fossilized into an image that it would prevent that from happening. He wanted to make it clear that he was a human being, not a god. He didn't want to be worshipped. I've come to learn that it's much more complex than that, like most things. Actually, what happened, according to this book, The Buddha Image, and it seems like a reputable source here, and I have heard similar. So some of the findings here don't surprise me. That this is what happens all the time in the pursuit of religious truth and spirituality, is that our initial ideas about something get turned upside down. And so if I were to be threatened by a change in what my teacher initially shared, that's even more of a problem, right? So I think it's actually healthy to have our views turned upside down. And that's exactly what this book about the Buddha image does. And that, again, it's a really positive thing. So the authors suggest that actually the early Buddhist Sangha was very much in alignment with early Vedic spirituality, Vedic religion. And for those of you who have never heard that term Vedic, it comes from the word Vedas, which is the kind of the foundational philosophy undergirding Hinduism. And so the early Sangha did not depart from the sentiments within the Indian culture, which meant within the Hindu culture that Buddhism manifests within. So what does that mean? What does that mean? Well, rather than the Buddha image being a problem, actually, it was considered the highest. If a great sage like the Buddha, who was a human being, entered nirvana, or what the Hindus also use that term nirvana, they also use the term purusha. It's kind of this amorphous uniting with the all. Maybe that's too simplistic of a conception here, but for early Buddhists, this idea of merging with the purusha or entering nirvana, if somebody did that, they were considered worthy of veneration to the point of worship as a god, which is different from my understanding of who the Buddha was, because I was taught, especially coming from a Western perspective, Westerners generally that gravitate to Buddhism do so because of the human element found within the Buddha. But the early practices and understandings of the Buddha entering nirvana is 180 degrees opposite of our understanding, or most of our understanding, or at least my understanding is or was, regarding the Buddha, particularly as a human being. So to put the Buddha into an image would be actually a kind of sacrilegious act, because the Buddha was no longer in the world of form. He had entered nirvana, and so to create some kind of an image of the Buddha would do a dishonor to the Buddha. And so the early, what are called aniconic, as opposed to iconic or icons, the early aniconic artwork around the Buddha never depicted the Buddha in physical features, besides maybe the bottoms of his feet, or the Dharma wheel, or there are some other things where the Buddha, how the Buddha was depicted, but they were not the Buddha was not depicted in human form. And so we didn't have any early images of the Buddha, which is something to really think about. And it wasn't because the Buddha told the Sangha, well, I don't want to be depicted in some form because I was just a human being. Actually, it's just the reverse. To depict somebody who entered nirvana in a image or in a statuary would be to defile what that person had accomplished, and it'd take away from the real worship, and I use that word somewhat sparingly, the real worship of the Buddha, but the sense maybe for us Americans to think about how we may revere somebody who is fully accomplished. So having this great and deep, deep reverence for a human being who had entered nirvana, which meant that he became, I guess the equivalent in our culture would be like a god. He had acquired godlike status. And to depict somebody who had acquired godlike status in an image would be to dishonor. It would take away from the worship of that person. Now, this line of thinking travels through up to even modern times. If you remember, a couple of weeks ago, or maybe about a month ago, I shared about the Eihei Shingi, the instructions for the pure assembly on how to practice together in a monastery. And Dogen gets this from the earlier Chinese Shingi. There's myriads of instructions on how to live together in harmony in an enlightened way. And I mentioned the rules around sleeping at nighttime. So how do you sleep? One of the instructions is sleep on your right side. Another instruction was to not look at the Buddha while you're sleeping. Now keep in mind, the monks would be sleeping in the Sodo, and there would be an image of Manjushri in there. So that would be kind of the equivalent of the Buddha. But do not look at the Buddha while sleeping. And I also mentioned the practice that not just while you're sleeping, but in general, when you see a Buddha image, there is the practice in general of not looking at it directly. And so I see a thread from that early Buddhist teaching all the way to Dogen's time. And even in the modern times, where I mentioned a nun who, when she went to see the remains of an enlightened Zen master that was stored at Sojiji. This Zen master, Chan master, had been put back together. His skeletal remains had been put back together so that he was sitting in zazen, clothed in robes, and just as so the skeleton and the nun didn't look at his face, didn't look at him. All she saw was his shoes. She couldn't bring her eyes up to look at the image, out of deep reverence and respect, not fear, but out of a deep sense of reverence and respect for that Chan master. And it's that same kind of reverence that I think Dogen is asking us to bring to the statuary of the Buddha, or the image of the Buddha. Now, you might wonder, well, how did we get all these Buddha images in the first place? Actually, and this was not a surprise to learn, but actually, it's thanks to Alexander the Great and his conquests of Asia. That Greeks came through in northern India, in the Gandhara area and other regions of India, and they were, of course, influenced by the teachings of the Buddha. And as you know, the Greeks had no problems putting gods into statues at all. It was second nature to do that. You can keep in mind all of these Greek gods who they have been for centuries depicted in various material form. And so there was no image of the Buddha for these Greeks that were encountering Buddhism, encountering the Dharma, and they thought, well, he's a god. He should be depicted in a statue, right? Because that's what they did for their gods. So now you get the formation of the Buddha in a statue form. So you see, whether it's coming at it from a early Indian perspective, or coming at it from a Western Greek perspective, both perspectives were doing their utmost to revere the Buddha because of his attainment. And so this kind of flies in the face of thinking about the Buddha as only a human. We don't want to dismiss the human side I don't want to dismiss the human side of the Buddha. But I also don't want to dismiss, and I feel like I feel like I need to work on this more. I don't want to dismiss that aspect of the Buddha that is worthy of my deepest veneration. And that I feel is somewhere I need to work on. And I suspect others may want to pick that up as a practice as well, is how to deeply venerate an image of the Buddha when we come into contact with it. Now, here's the twist. Here's the twist that makes it a little bit different from, say, the religion of our upbringing. For me, Catholicism, Christianity. Here's the twist, is that whenever we put our palms together and bow to a Buddha image, we're bowing to that which is highest within ourself. So that when we're really venerating a Buddha image, or if you're standing at an altar or something like that, we are simultaneously recognizing that Buddha within ourself. And that's what makes it, we're not separate from the Buddha. This is what makes this bow so powerful, and this not looking directly at the image. And this sitting in zazen, if we sit in zazen with that attitude of a sitting Buddha, where's the, wow, how do you do that? How do you not put Buddha in form? And at the same time, we've found this form that we just love. There's detailed instructions on how to sit. We place we get the cosmic mudra, we sit with the back straight, we crisscross our legs, we have the eyes, soft gaze. And so we have all these instructions, but Keep in mind, Dogen says in his instructions for Zazen, Zazen is not step-by-step meditation, and it's not limited to sitting or lying down. Sitting is the posture in which the Buddha attained enlightenment. And lying down is the posture in which the Buddha attained nirvana. So, but the Buddha is not captured in either of those postures. He cannot be captured in Zazen either. And so this makes me think, what's my state of mind when I'm sitting in Zazen? Am I revering the Buddha within me? In a kind of, again, I don't have the best word to say this, but in a worshipful way, like a real maybe reverential way. And especially in the Zen tradition, where there's koans that say things like, if you meet the Buddha on the road, kill the Buddha, right? There's that koan, if you meet the Buddha on the road, kill the Buddha. What does that mean? And initially I thought, that must mean like, don't get attached to our ideas of the Buddha. Don't get attached to our ideas of the Buddha. Don't get attached to ideas of holiness even. But now I'm coming to think I don't want to exclude that kind of insight. That could be a powerful insight for some of us, not being attached to the image of the Buddha. But I think there's another layer going on here with that kind of instruction of kill the Buddha. And that is to bring about your most reverential self when encountering the Buddha. To bring about your most reverential self, because that image of the Buddha it's like a doorway to the formless Buddha, which cannot be captured in an image. It's the idol that leads us to having no idols, right? In order to have no idols, we create the image. And that image, that idol, is a doorway to the imageless. And you can see here how this might resonate with those of us who were raised in the Abrahamic traditions, where there's an emphasis on not putting God in boxes, and not having labels for God. At least I see a real resonance there. And Dogen also, in his very first story here in the Zuimonki, he talks about the Buddha image. It's interesting that he chooses a story about a Buddha image to talk about. And this is called Shobo Genzo Zuimonki. This is the primer to the Shobo Genzo. So it's for the most part very readable. Unlike the Shobo Genzo, which is highly philosophical, highly poetic, has all sorts of references to earlier Chinese philosophy. The Shobo Genzo Zuimonki also has some of those references, but it's written in a way that is more accessible. So this is the first thing that Dogen writes about in Zuimonki, and because this is one of the patterns we should keep in mind if we're studying Dogen, if we're students of Dogen Zenji, is that whenever he puts something number one, it means we really have to pay close attention to it. So if the fact that this place is placed in the very front of the Zuimonki means that it's something that we really need to pay attention to. In the Zoku Kosoden, continued biographies of eminent monks, there's a story about a monk in the assembly of a certain Zen master. The monk worshipped, that's the word, worshipped a golden image of the Buddha as well as the relics of the Buddha. Even in the dormitory, he constantly burned incense and prostrated himself before them, honoring and making offerings. So this is this reverential kind of attitude this monk has towards the Buddha. One day, the master said to the monk, the image and relics of the Buddha which you worship will eventually be harmful to you. The monk was not convinced. The monk was not convinced. The master continued, "This is the doing of the demon Papias. Throw them away right now." All right, so in Buddhist cosmology, there are also demons and heavenly beings. All right, so this is one of the demons. This is the doing of a demon, he says. Get rid of it. Eventually, it's going to do you harm to worship the Buddha like you, in the way that you are doing it, in the way that you are doing it. Although angry, continues the story, although angry, the monk opened up the box which held the Buddha image, his Buddha statue, his golden Buddha. He found a poisonous snake lying coiled up inside. All right, so that's the story. That's the story. What could that possibly mean? So one interpretation is that we have to be careful about these images of the Buddha that we come across, as well as when we're sitting zazen. Because we start to develop, we start to harden. I know, I've noticed this in myself, that it's easy to, when you've been sitting for a long time, by that I mean years, it's easy to harden our conceptions, our ideas about the Buddha. And as soon as we do that, we're not actually connecting to the source, to our real spiritual power, our spiritual energy. Dogen Zenji says, as I think about this story, the images and relics of the Buddha should be revered, since they are the form and bones left by the Tathagata, right? So Dogen says, he acknowledges that the images and the relics of the Buddha should be revered, right? And how do we do that? How do we do that? Well, certainly it's a state of mind, but it's certainly how we comport ourselves. And one of the things that people have done is, well, you don't look directly at the image. That's a way of revering that Buddha. Or earlier Buddhists, they didn't have any images of the Buddha, so that made it much clearer. Or early Buddhists didn't have those images, so that made that sense of veneration much more palpable. Then he says, Dogen Zenji continues, nevertheless, it is a false view to think that you will be able to gain enlightenment only through worshiping them. Such a view will cause you to become possessed by the demon and the poisonous snake. Yeah, he goes on. So this is not the way to attain enlightenment, right? Through worship of images. Again, because it points to this false idea that the image is what we're trying to attain, or sitting in zazen is going to somehow gain us what we're at, is going to get us what we're after. If we sit in zazen, we will attain enlightenment. We will attain Buddhahood. He's suggesting that's a false idea. He goes on, since the merit of the Buddha's teaching does not change, reverence of images and relics will certainly bring blessings to human and heavenly beings, equal to paying reverence to the living Buddha. Wow. In general, it is true that if you revere and make offerings to the world of the three treasures, your faults will disappear and you will gain merit. The karma that leads you to the evil realms will be removed. Boy, don't we need that today? We all have that karma that leads us to the evil realms. What are the evil realms? Let's see. Evil realms, there's a note. Samsara, here's the note. Samsara is categorized into 6 realms. Hell, the realm of insatiable spirits, animals, Ashura demons, human, and heavenly beings. The first 3 are called the evil realms while the other three are called the good realms. Sometimes the first four are called the evil realms, and the last two are called the good realms. All right, so our minds can transmigrate or skate through these different realms of existence in the snap of a finger, right? What are these first three? The hell realms. You guys know those hell realms, don't you? That's why we're here in the first place. We've been through some hell realms. The realm of the hungry ghosts, the insatiable spirits. You've been there. I've been there. We know about those insatiable spirits. Those insatiable spirits lie within us too, as well as the Buddha. Right? So Dogen is saying by coming to a worshipful and revering, reverential feeling toward an image of the Buddha, it removes these hell realms from us. It changes our karma. That's very powerful. That's very powerful. So I just want to highlight and acknowledge for myself, I need to do a better job at revering images of Buddha. Just really revere, like how do I approach that? How do I approach images of the Buddha? I heard it said from my teacher that in the Theravadan school, you would never touch the robe of a monk. You'd never touch the robe of a monk. It's that mindset. We're talking about a mindset of reverence to something that is very mysterious. And that mindset of reverence is what we want to cultivate when we're doing Zazen even. Because that which is worthy of reverence, that which is worthy of worship, is also within us. So when we're doing Zazen, we're touching that. We're touching that within us. All right? And of course, when you touch that deeply, all our negative karma, all of our cycling through samsara, the world of suffering, ceases, at least for those moments. You know? Dogen Zenji concludes, however, it is a mistaken view to expect to gain enlightenment of the Dharma in this way. So Dogen concludes further is that we have to follow the Dharma, follow the teachings of the Buddha. He says, since being the Buddha's child is following the Buddha's teachings and reaching Buddhahood directly, we must devote ourselves to following the teaching, the Dharma, and put all our efforts into the practice of the way. Right? So that's the emphasis here. Yes, worshipful, reverential sense of the Buddha image, but then that's not enough, right? It's a very important piece of it, but it's not enough. We need to actually put it into practice, put the teachings of the Buddha into practice. And this, I think, has real implications for us. If we really can, within the practice of Zazen, if we can really see the formless nature of the Buddha within us, that which should be revered, then we come to not know who we are. We come to not know who we are. Or the reverse, we come to see that within us is everyone and everything. Right? So Thich Nhat Hanh has this beautiful poem called Call Me By My True Names. Maybe some of you have heard it before, but he talks about being the pirate that rapes the person that's trying to reach the other shore, as well as the person who is raped. He talks about being the one who hurts as well as being the victim. He talks about being the snake And he talks about being the frog and the frog that's eaten by the snake. All right, so we see this wonderful, beautiful intersection of all of life. And that's the potential for our Zazen. To see that we're the one that is a tyrant, that rules over a state in a tyrannical way. We are also the people that are victimized by that tyrant. So what we tend to do is make sides, like I'm on this side and you're on that side, and I want this side to win and I don't want that side to win. This has real implications for us living in the world. How do we live in such a way that we can embrace the all and at the same time be able to speak out against injustices? We can look at this in terms of gender identity too. We tend to see ourselves as our gendered birth, our gender by birth, but when you look more closely and you can see, oh, am I male? Am I female? Am I neither? Am I both? These are kinds of things that can come together too in Zazen. It really has us start to think about our identity and who we are. Am I black? Am I white? Am I Asian? Right? So, and this is, we have to be careful here too, because we live in this particular body, in this particular mindset. We have families that we take care of, and people have certain images of us, of who they think we are. And in many ways, we have been trying to live up to certain images of what other people project on us to be. And that's normal. But Zazen helps to break up those projections that other people have on us so that we don't get caught. So that we don't get caught in any of these views. Just like the Buddha is formless. There's a sense of formlessness. And yet at the same time, we have to practice the dharma in this body. All right. So that's what I wanted to share this morning. That's my Dharma talk. I'd love if you have any thoughts or questions. About 10 minutes here. If anybody wanted to bring up any of their thoughts about this. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for being here today. Yeah.
Daishin-san, this is Jikan. Can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Great. So you had mentioned in your talk that the Buddha attained enlightenment sitting upright and attained nirvana lying down. Could you say more about that? I'm really intrigued by that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sure. I mean, well, he attained enlightenment sitting under the Bodhi tree. That's just the story. That's my understanding of the story. And then when he was laying down on his right side, and we see images. So we see images of the Buddha laying on his right side, and that's considered his nirvana pose. Yeah.
Cool. I didn't know that. Thank you. And I also love the connection to Dogen recommending that we lay on our right side. That's really neat.
Cool, cool. Thank you.
But the Buddha was also passing away when he laid on his right side, right?
We say passing away. We say passing away as if there's nothing else that happened there. But I'm just encouraging us to get into the minds of those who have been Buddhists 2 millennia ago, over 2 millennia ago, and what was their perception of that moment? And as it's been handed down to us, he attains nirvana in that moment. We say passing away. I don't think passing away, though, does it justice, because we have too many of our own ideas about what passing away is. It might be passing away means there's nothing that happens, right? Especially if you're atheist or have an atheistic bent, which is fine. I'm not critiquing that. But if we look through an atheistic lens, passing away means nothing happened there. Or if you have a kind of a bend that affirms an afterlife, passing away might mean his spirit went to heaven, which is also fine. I'm not critiquing that particular perception. I'm just trying to get at what may have, because we don't know, what may have been the perception of early Buddhists. What is their perception of nirvana or attaining this Purusha state? And as I can just piecing things together, I feel like this is a moment where there's just this great, incredible reverence for a teacher that did so much during his lifetime. The closest I can get to it is watching with my own teacher on Zoom the funeral of Thich Nhat Hanh. Knowing that I knew him and I practiced with him, albeit for brief times in person, but I studied the Dharma that he taught, and to see and witness his own death, it just took me beyond, or not his death, but his funeral. It just took me beyond. I don't know. There was this sense of worshipfulness or reverence towards that moment of like, this great teacher has passed away. I guess we can use that word, passed away. I use that word there. But again, I want to get at this. There's something that I feel like I'm missing.
Thank you. It's almost like his conscience was going on.
Yeah. Yeah. By the way, we just had my father passed away 2 years ago, almost to the day, and we had a ceremony for him this morning before I got on for Zazen. I invited my family through Zoom to join us for the ceremony. So my mother, my older brother, and his wife, and my nephews and niece, and my sister, and her son and daughter. I should think this is her son. In any case, and then of course Jisho joined us and my kids. And there's really something about doing a ceremony for somebody who has passed away. And in the Zen tradition, there's this beautiful thing we do where we make an offering. And some of you have seen this at the Nebraska Zen Center. We make a food offering. We make an offering of coffee and tea. I don't know if you can see it behind me. My father's picture is back there, and then there's gave him something that he liked to drink, so coffee, and then something sweet. And so that practice, it really just, doing the ceremony like that with my family was deeply meaningful to me, because I felt like there was a continuation there. Like it was really deeply honoring his life, such that his life is still present in a way. And I don't want to just say his life is present in me, although that's the case, that his life is present in me and my kids and other family members. That's definitely the case, but there's just this sense of connection to something greater than myself. And that's what we believe in the Soto tradition, that when you die, you become Buddha. You manifest Buddha in your passing away. And so when we have a relative that dies and we can see them, oh, they've passed, they've entered nirvana. Right? Yeah.
I have a comment. So this is Tara kind of used to doing it. You mentioned the quote about Dogen saying that venerating the image of the Buddha is the same as has the same merit as venerating the living Buddha. That's my interpretation. I
Yeah,
probably
no, that's what it says. Yeah.
misread it. The first thing I thought of was the story of Bodhidharma telling the emperor, there was no merit generated by you building these temples. And I wonder, my initial thought is, and what I've read is maybe that's because the emperor was like trying to generate that, or had his own, I imagine, political and area control and realistic purposes for doing that, you extension of the bureaucracy, whatever. And so it wasn't really for veneration, it wasn't really out of spiritual practice, it was just
Uh,
venal mercenary, compared to maybe if Bodhidharma was talking to a householder who asked how much merit is generated by this statue of the Buddha made out of a rock, clay. Maybe Bodhidharma would have just said nothing or bowed or something that meaningful, you know,
right.
honesty. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. Yeah. So what is our intentions behind this practice? And I just think for me anyways, and maybe I speak for some of you all too, but to have that sense of reverence, to reinstill it. I was atheist for a while, and then I found Buddhism, and I gravitated to it in part because there was no mention of God. And I thought, oh, okay, I need to just stay away from that verbiage for the time being. And but I feel like I lost something in that process. And it's only more recently that I feel like I'm gaining it back, and that sense, that deep sense of of reverence. I guess that's, I wish there was another word there that I could use, but this sense of, yeah, there is something way more here that is just beyond my comprehension, beyond my mental faculties, that's worthy of bowing to, you know? And I feel like we've lost that sense largely in our secular society. We don't circle around the great mystery, this great mystery, the way that ancient cultures did. And there's something that's lost in that, and not being able to recognize that which is worthy of. I mean, it could be the very, our life force itself. Maybe that's one way of thinking about Buddha or God, is this life force that's pulsing within us, you know, and how to, just revering that. Of course, we do in a sense. I mean, when something horrible happens and somebody dies unexpectedly, of course, we feel it. We feel it within us, because that's that life force within us going out. It gets diminished in a sense, and we can feel that. Yeah. But to, come back to it, that's what our practice is about. That's what Zen practice, I think, is about. When we sit Zazen, it's trying to come back to that place of really revering life. And that's the first precept too, not taking life. Oh. Well, we are at our time, folks.